The one thing that I think this industry always has been somewhat, plagued by, if you will, is the fact that we have been focusing on technology just for the sake of technology. The user wants to have the experience they currently have when you open an iPhone app. They want to consume their entertainment, they want to get their financial tasks done, whatever it is that they're looking for. They want to get it done, close, and never interact with what the actual underlying technologies are. Nobody walks across Times Square and looks at the pavement and wonders what brand fiber optic cable is underneath there that powers all the offices in the houses. It'd be absurd. Yet here in Web3, some would pound our chest and we say, "Wow, this is amazing! And this is 150,000 TPS and near instant finale and blah 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 blah," and the user doesn't care. So I think the big thing that not enough people, I think, the conversations have started, but I think not enough people are talking about is how do we onboard the next not 10 million, 20 million, 30, but billion people to blockchain technology.
Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year. It's officially 2025, and I'm feeling ready to kick off this especially exciting year in crypto. My name is David Pakman. I'm the head of venture investments and one of the managing partners here at CoinFund. Today, I am lucky. I am joined by my co-host, Feng, one of my partners. He is making his debut here on Mind with CoinFund. Evan, welcome to the podcast. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about you, who you are, and your role at CoinFund, and what you're closely paying attention to in the space as we start 2025?
Thanks, David, and Happy New Year to our audience and listeners. Hi, my name is Evan Feng, and I'm partner and director of research at CoinFund. I have been at CoinFund now a little over 4 years and full-time crypto closer to 5 or 6. I started off my career in a very traditional finance role doing investment banking at Barclays Capital, and then moving on over to the buy side at Citadel, and then Point 72, where at both firms I was on tech, media, and telecom teams, so covering large cap stocks like Disney, Comcast, Verizon, etc. But the more exciting turn in my personal journey started during the garden leave between the two hedge funds when I finally had some time to read the Bitcoin white paper. Immediately was struck by the simplicity and power of the asset itself and the family of technologies that enable, and soon found myself spending nights and weekends just nonstop reading and starting to deploy into the space before jumping in full time. What's interesting to me these days, we'll certainly talk about gaming and the role Web3 plays in the overlap with gaming, but other areas that I'm spending time on as we start 2025 include thinking through where AI agents may continue to develop as a space, not only from a financialization and autonomy perspective, but I think some of the functionality that we find interesting, especially the opportunity to have wallets that they control, actually overlaps somewhat with what we'll talk about with more general overlap with Web3 and gaming. But I'll pass it over to you, David, as well. What are things that you're paying attention to before we get into the specifics?
Well, I feel increasingly positive that we're going to have a really meaningful consumer adoption cycle, this crypto cycle. We're certainly going to have a lot more people owning digital assets, especially with what's happening here in the US. But we're going to talk today about some evidence of projects we're seeing that are doing this wonderful job combining really great consumer experiences with the benefits of crypto and blockchains. And we've waited years for, I think, this moment, but we're seeing some evidence it's happening. So I'm paying a lot of attention to the opposite of infrastructure, really looking at where are we seeing demonstrated consumer adoption and what novel experiences are made possible because of crypto and blockchains that we can't do in Web 2, which I think will be the real tip of the spear for exciting investments in the consumer space.
And that's a great segue to start introducing the topic of today's show and the guests that we have right now. I'm pleased to introduce Lydia Chiu as well as Theo Agranat. So Theo is director of Web3 at Gunzilla Games and has been on one of the many faces of the studio as they become more public with the launch of Off the Grid. Off the Grid, if you haven't seen it yet, is onboarded almost 10 million addresses since early access went live in October 2024, and very much broken into the mainstream awareness by topping the Epic Game Store downloads list, as well as Twitch streams during the week of its launch marketing. Also on the show, we have Lydia, who manages the Blizzard Ecosystem Fund and is a senior vice president of corporate development at Ava Labs. And just as my background, maybe extending a little bit more, why am I the person talking about gaming today? Gaming is a lifelong hobby of mine. So I grew up initially playing games on the Nintendo 64 and Game Boy Color, and then really cemented the hobby as a PC gamer starting in the early 2000s during the golden age of Blizzard Entertainment. It's a hobby that has continued into adulthood for me, and I've been really pleased to see how, starting with Axie Infinity, but now extending now through multiple cycles, the intersection between Web3 and gaming has just become ever more obvious. And we'll certainly talk about some of the specific data points that we're seeing both internal to Gunzilla and off the grid, but also more broadly overall. With that, I'd love to just introduce and pass the mic over to Lydia and Theo. How's it going, guys?
Right,
Hey,
Lydia.
yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me, David and Evan. It's great to join you guys and Theo on the podcast. And Happy New Year, everyone. For a little bit of context, I've also been a lifelong gamer, and gaming is just generally a passion. I spent a decade on Wall Street and was a TMT investor, telecom, media, and technology. And I spent a lot of time with the video game publishers and developers as well. When I discovered Web3 or crypto, like back in 2015, as we used to call it, I had a lot of thoughts about which industries could be innovated upon. And one of the things that I had noticed from then all the way up until the last cycle in 2020 was the user experience was just atrocious from a consumer point of view. And it just did not make sense. How would we onboard Web2 gamers, right? Like the experience of playing a game is super seamless. And we were really excited to meet Vlad, Theo, the rest of the Gunzilla team back in early 2022 because they had a really strong vision for what Web3 gaming or Web3 integration to gaming should look like and what the user experience should look like. We can dive into all of that later. Theo, I'll pass it back to you.
Absolutely. First of all, also very happy New Year to everyone. Thanks for having us here. Really appreciate it. Yeah, so my story goes back in Web3, 12 years I've gotten involved ago with Web3 technologies. At that point, of course, we didn't even have smart contracts yet, right? It was just Bitcoin. And then it was absolutely fascinating to see the evolution of that. And as things had evolved, I started getting a lot more involved with Web3 on the advisory side, on the investment side. In 2021, met the absolutely phenomenal team at Gunzilla, Vlad, his co-founder Alexander Zoll, and another 100 people that they had back then. Absolutely fell in love with the project, the team, its ability to revolutionize not only Web3 gaming, but also Web2 gaming. And now, yeah, it's been 3 years and 380 now full-time employees. Early access launching to several months ago, to the tune of actually now at this point in time, over 12 million wallets, over 230 million transactions on the blockchain, and lots of exciting things to come. So thanks for having me here.
Thanks for joining us. We're going to talk a lot about Gunzilla and the user benefit and the importance of gaming, and how we ask all of our guests, we want to start with is, what's the one thing in crypto that no one is talking about? It's something that people should be paying closer attention to, but they're not hearing about it. So what do you think?
I'll kick it off and I'll say that the one thing that I think this industry always has been somewhat, plagued by, if you will, is the fact that we have been focusing on technology just for the sake of technology. It was a very common thing also in the early, web days, where we're talking about transactions per second. We're talking about, finality. We're talking about monolithic versus modular. We're talking about all the different, labels. And it's this, it's that. The user doesn't care, right? The user wants to have the experience they currently have when you open an iPhone app. They want to consume their entertainment. They want to get their financial tasks done, whatever it is that they're looking for. They want to get it done, close, and never interact with what the actual underlying technologies are. Nobody walks across Times Square and looks at the pavement and wonders what brand fiber optic cable is underneath there that powers all the offices in the house. It'd be absurd. Yet here in Web3, some would pound our chest and we say, "Wow, this is amazing, and this is 150,000 TPS and near infinite and blah 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 blah," and the user doesn't care. So I think the big thing that not enough people, I think, the conversations have started, but I think not enough people are talking about is, how do we onboard the next not 10 million, 20 million, 30, but billion people to blockchain technology. And in order for that to happen, we have to make it easier, we have to make it faster, we have to make it more secure, we have to make it more personalized, and we have to do away with all the technical jargon and the very technical, difficult steps that a person needs to go through in order to set up a wallet and remember 16 words and on-off ramp fiat and swap tokens and all these things that currently are somewhat prevalent in Web3. And to that end, one of the other things that I always loved about Gunzilla is that they always put the user first. They always, from the get-go, we always said everything else has to move into the background, has to be transparent to the user, and just focus on what the user wants. And the user wants a good experience.
Well, so Theo, what have been some of the pieces of experience that you've introduced here that you did not see present in Web3 prior to this? And what sort of technology did you need to use to enable it?
Sure. So let's start with the most obvious one, right? And that is that Gunzilla built off the grid, and off the grid is now the first ever blockchain enabled game that is already live and running and being played on PlayStation and Xbox. Has never happened before in Web3. We've done it. Now, what else have we done? We are setting up with, of course, Avalanche's help, right, and their technology. We're setting up wallets automatically in the background. So you only need your Xbox account, you don't only need your PlayStation account, your Epic Games account on PC. The wallet will be set up for you automatically. The assets that you find, earn, trade, purchase, etc. in the marketplace or the game are automatically put into your wallet. Any tokens that you obtain during the playing as a reward for completing a mission or winning or whatnot, or that you obtain by selling an item in the marketplace, that in-game currency automatically gets deposited into your wallet as well. So you don't need to on-off ramp any fiat. You do not need to swap any tokens. You don't need to set up a wallet. Everything is taken care of for you. Outside of the game itself, we have our Gunzilla wallet that has your Apple login and or your Gmail login. It gets tied to a companion game we have. It gets tied to the main game. All of that happens very, very easily and transparently and seamlessly to the user. The user never has to interact directly with the blockchain if they don't want to. They can if they want to. We do have the option of doing KYC, taking custody of your in-game items, connecting to OpenSea, selling it on OpenSea directly because we actually natively integrated into OpenSea, right? Our Gunzilla chain is. But you don't have to do these things. You can also just own your items, sell them on our internal marketplace for in-game currency, purchase other items for in-game currency, share, trade, whatever you want with your items, use the items in-game, and never really directly interact with Web3 and just enjoy your gaming experience.
One question, maybe shifting over to you, Lydia. I think your seat gives you a unique view into the marketing that ultimately was an extremely successful launch into early access for Gunzilla. So could you talk a little bit more, both from Avalanche side and working with Theo, Vlad, and the rest of the team, what it looked like to see or be part of the orchestration of communicating some of the value propositions that Theo mentioned, but really making that really accessible to as large an audience as possible?
Yeah, and to echo a lot of things that Theo said that I wholeheartedly agree with, that a lot of the Web3 space, a lot of the marketing and like the communication with users is this is what the technology does. Whereas as consumers throughout history, like Mad Men style, and all the way until like digital marketing to now, people like to be told what products can do for them and how it makes their lives better, more engaging, more fun. And I think as an industry, like crypto generally has not done a good job of that. So throughout our relationship with Gunzilla, working with Theo, working with Vlad, we were first put in touch with Vlad. We first met him in early 2022. So not as early to the journey as Theo, but we've been working together pretty deeply for almost 3 years now. And one of the things that Vlad really crystallized early on was, yes, this game uses blockchain, but also it's a really good game. And we loved that vision and how strong his belief in the approach to bringing it to market was. And he wanted to make sure that he could realize that approach too, which was putting it across consoles, across PC, and having this really, really seamless user flow. Like as a gamer, what do you do when you want to play a new game? You purchase it on either the Xbox or PlayStation Store, and then you set up your account and you're in. You spend more time going through the tutorial of the game than you do actually getting into the game. So we need to do the same thing for a Web3 game, right? Like we should really, I'm waiting for the day we just call it a game, and whether or not it uses blockchain is completely like unimportant. I'll use that as my own segue to say one of the things that I personally really appreciated was the emphasis on going to market and marketing to gamers where they already are. Godzilla did not market to a lot of Web3 publications. Initially, it was, like Polygon, it was IGN, it was traditional gaming publications where gamers are already reading, and then showing a trailer that showed a really fun game. Like people who are really into battle royale and battleground games, like it looked great, and with a really novel concept of interchangeable limbs. And the emphasis on not positioning blockchain as a selling feature of the game was a really, really important decision. It seems so easy to make that decision in retrospect, but I do feel like a lot of games that originated in Web3 use that as a selling point and the main selling point, whereas the approach should always be, hey, I've built a really good game and you will have fun playing it. Making games is like making movies. You never know if it's going to be a hit. You can try to use a formula, but at the end of the day, it's how you tell people that they're going to invest hours and have fun doing it that really matters. So I think that was the first critical step. That was a very big shift in marketing strategy from a blockchain enabled game.
Lydia, can you talk a little bit about some of the specific developer features of Avalanche that helped the Gunzilla team abstract away wallet complexity and some of the other benefits that Theo talked about?
Yeah, so a lot of what works about Avalanche in allowing game developers to deliver a really smooth player experience is the ability to deploy your own L1s. So Gunzilla runs on its own chain. It's powered by Avalanche Consensus. It's part of the larger Avalanche network in that there's ability for cross-chain communication between Gunzilla's chain and other L1s in the network. But Gunzilla is completely in charge of the parameters of the chain, how quickly the chain can move, how quickly blocks are confirmed, all of that. So they can deliver this really, really smooth and fast experience for players without worrying about a noisy neighbor. There isn't going to be some ordinals mint or some rune mint or some crazy NFT collection that's going to bottleneck the chain. And then that allowed for also easy integration for creation of custodial wallet that players just have as part of their account. And then because it's all blockchain enabled and Gunzilla chain is EVM compatible, it's very easy for NFT marketplaces to just very quickly integrate it. There's no custom work necessarily that needs to be done. So you have this seamless interoperability that allows the users, if the players really want to dive into all of the capabilities and all of the features of the game, then they can opt in to do that. And they will have a lot of control over their assets that's enabled because of blockchain. And because Avalanche allowed Gonzalo to spin up their own L1, be protected from the uncertainties and volatility of a massively permissionless public network.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about the decisions that you guys made, maybe in two different categories. It's a great game and we need to hide all the complexity of Web3. And then there's the how do we talk about the game and the benefits of Web3? Can you just talk about some of like the pre-launch decisions you guys made about how to think about those two buckets?
Of course. So there's several things. The core kind of problem that we're solving for Web 2, I'll actually use a little anecdote from my own life to make it very clear, is one of asset ownership. So I have two older boys. We played together as a squad, my wife, my two boys, and I, in Fortnite. And we played for several years, and it was a lot of fun. And the kids, in the course of those years, accumulated thousands of dollars worth of skins. It was their own hard-earned summer job cash, plus some Christmas monies from grandparents, plus birthday monies from us. And the end result was that they were super happy they had all these skins. For kids, by the way, of course, asset ownership, digital asset ownership is the most natural thing in the world. They would ask for V-Bucks that they wanted for their birthday instead of real world clothes. And the social status that they got from their virtual clothes also was higher than any social status they could have gotten from real world clothes. And I don't know whether you guys remember or not, but there was this time in the like 2019, 2018 timeframe where kids were making like $100 an hour being Fortnite tutors because it also elevated the social status, how good you were at the game. It's kind of interesting times. Anyways, long story short, inevitably they moved on from Fortnite to other games. So they come to me, especially my older one, and said, "Hey, Dad, how to get my money back? How do I sell my assets?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Well, I bought things, right? I own them." So we got into what a EULA is and what corporations do or don't do, right, for their gamers. And he felt like this is the most unfair thing in the world. How is that possible? And at the very core of it, I believe that over the next half a decade, maybe even less, gamers will inevitably demand that they can own their own assets. So at the most basic, foundation of it, that the game and the economy within it and around it is built on, is the concept of fair asset ownership. You should have your own assets. You should be able to do anything you want with those assets. And that isn't just the selling of the assets, but also very simple tasks such as sharing a skin with a friend that loads in with you on the same squad. There's a really famous knight skin of season 2 in Fortnite. You had to really do these crazy things on the battle pass to earn it. My kids did that, and they were like, I want to share that skin with my friend that is on my squad. Why can't I do that? Super, super simple use cases. So from the ground up, the game was built with that in mind. Furthermore, we set it as a goal to be really the game built by gamers for gamers. So we made a couple of other very unorthodox choices. For example, one of them is not to have a company store. We do not sell directly anything to the user. It's a peer-to-peer marketplace, and the only way to obtain an item is to either load into the game, find it on the island, extract it, which again, I repeat, costs no money at all. It's a free-to-download, free-to-play game, or two, purchase it from someone that listed it on the peer-to-peer marketplace, that went to the island, obtained it, and then listed it on the marketplace. The only monetization, of course, is our $12 a month off the grid pro battle pass. They get you a content pack and all sorts of other cool benefits, but it's totally optional, doesn't give you any competitive advantages, etc. So that was one very important decision that we made early on. Two, we decided that since we couldn't find the tools necessary to deploy our very cool, very fun, very interactive, immersive game with Web3 technologies, since we couldn't find anything to deploy into that already existed, we ended up building everything ourselves. That included, of course, the L1 that Lydia was referring to, which is our Gunzilla chain, which is built on top of a highly modified Avalanche subnet. But it also includes our wallet. It also includes our blockchain scan. It also includes our NFT marketplace. It includes a companion app. It includes our NFT minting engine. So part two was that we realized, okay, we will build all these incredible tools for ourselves that don't exist. Now we're going to focus on deploying them into what we call the AAA Web3 gaming ecosystem called Gunzilla, where we will onboard other Web2 IP, of course, good other Web3 IP as well, where we can allow game developers to focus just on providing an immersive experience to the gamer, and we'll take care of everything else. So as that evolved, we realized that we have several really cool kind of components in our hands that are going to evolve into this very large ecosystem. So those are some of the kind of main decision points that we had and that we made.
Thanks, Theo. I wanted to jump in and ask a question. In light of the success of the early access launch for Off the Grid, one question that I think a lot of people have is what's next? How do you sustain this initial interest? What is the strategy to essentially take advantage of the interest that you already have in the player base that you've started growing to really preserve that, retain them, really get them to potentially spend even more time in the future with Off the Grid, especially as I think the success is likely going to result in some copycats, right? Imitation being the sincerest form of flattery, something we see in Web3 quite often, especially because of the relative availability of capital in some ways. So, Theo, keeping in mind this episode will be airing early in 2025, how do you think about continuing the content pipeline and really ensuring that players have as much to engage with as possible and really doubling down on the breakout success?
Let's separate it into several different buckets. And number one, you brought up something very interesting. Other folks that will be also, of course, trying to build things like this. We welcome that. That's awesome. Web3 needs more awesome games for folks to play. But having said that, we have right now a 5-year moat. This project took 5 years to bring to early access play on October 8th, and it took over $100 million to build. This is not something that can easily get copied, besides the incredible team of 380 people working on it. So that's one. Two, as you've seen with our Save Democracy pack in November that made Twitter go wild, as you've seen with our Crackhead Christmas content pack in December that also melted minds, we have an ongoing pipeline of content that we're releasing on a very regular basis. We have new game modes that we're releasing on a regular basis. We have new storylines we're releasing on a regular basis. I'll remind you guys that we are the first ever battle royale game across any industry, Web 2 including, that has a battle royale game that has a storyline, 60 hours of storyline on both sides of the conflict, written by none other than Richard Morgan, the author of the book Altered Carbon, which was turned into an award-winning Netflix show by the same name. So as you're playing your battle royale game, you can literally play a storyline as well. And I'll add to that a little side note that one of the biggest complaints that regular shooter players have, including myself, on why they don't enjoy the battle royale games as much, and many don't even play battle royale games at all, is that they don't have a storyline. There is not a single game out in the battle royale genre that has an actual storyline. So with 60 hours of storyline on both sides of the conflict, we have content already mapped out for not just weeks and months, but for years to come. So that's obviously one of the main ways that everything is going to stay fresh. And with this IP, the biggest kind of difficulty in building a large game is always the kind of underlying structure and foundation that not very many people understand, or it's not very obvious to a regular person that isn't in the development process. But based on this foundation, you can do so many incredibly cool things with the story, with extensions, with another island next to it, with the space station, because we have a space elevator that brings precious minerals and materials down from space. There's so many things that we can evolve into with this IP. It's incredible, right? It's incredibly exciting. So that's how we're going to keep things very fresh.
I have a question for Lydia and Evan. We're sitting here at a moment where this has been a very successful early launch, and Theo's telling us a lot about the roadmap, about how keep it interesting, and a lot of talent here to continue to make this a wonderful experience for consumers. But both of you got involved in this project long before any of that evidence was really clear. So from a partnership and investment standpoint, what did each of you see to give you the conviction to start working with this team long before we had a hit in a hit-driven market?
I'll let Lydia answer first, and then we'll rewind time a couple more
Yeah.
months, and then I'll answer.
I would say, like I mentioned earlier, Vlad's vision was like crystal clear when he conveyed it to us. And from then until now, delivered on that vision. Nothing has changed from what the team said they were going to deliver to what has been delivered thus far. Plus, also, I wouldn't say that we couldn't see anything. There were some sneak peeks of some really good content. And Eamon, our CEO and founder of Alva Labs, he actually did go take a trip to Frankfurt, visit the studio, and got an in-person viewing of what had been built. So there was definitely proof in the pudding very early on. And I think people forget that Gunzilla's been around for 5 years. Like, this wasn't an overnight success. The game wasn't built in 2 years or 1 year or even a few months, which is common for a lot of Web3 smart contract apps on chain. Games take forever to develop. And I don't think this industry, like Web3 specifically, is familiar with that concept. Unless you've invested in video game developers before, it can take sometimes up to a decade, and it will take tens and hundreds of millions of dollars to deliver a game in a relatively short time frame. So I think this 5-year moat is really going to be critical because everyone can try to copy, but I think if they do try to copy, they're underestimating what it actually takes to build a game. Not a Web3 game, not blockchain enabled anything, it's just build a game. And to have a team with people who are familiar enough with, I mean, I guess you can probably find quite a few developers who are familiar with Unreal 5 at this point, but the ability to put together a compelling story, that's a lot of creative. So I think it was knowing who was on the team, meeting the team members, and Neil Blomkamp has been part of the team for a long time. He was there very early on. And also just knowing that Vlad and Alex had all of this extensive experience with Warface and bring a free-to-play game to market, and then them and the team growing it to over $1 billion in revenues. There's a lot of confidence in knowing that the team has experience doing that, and then combining it with creatives like Neil Blomkamp and the rest of the team building these really like rich, really high quality game mechanics and content that I wouldn't say that there was like a leap of faith to take that was hard to take. I would say that it was easy in retrospect to say yes. I think is probably the easiest way for me to convey.
Evan, do you concur? Take us back through the CoinFund's origin story getting involved here.
Absolutely. So I think adding on to what Lydia said, some of the pattern matching that really fired off for my neurons was the quality of the team that Vlad and Alex had already aggregated together at the time. Lydia mentioned, Richard Morgan as well as Neil Blomkamp. And I think it felt like a complete group of folks that were already very dedicated to a long-term vision. As Lydia noted, the ability to walk away from, or at least deprioritize Warface to work on something new, a game IP and world, not just an initial title, but something that could become a platform that could only be built with Web3 was something I believe Vlad said on our first meeting. And the fact that it resonated a lot with my priors really felt to me like this was a team that had a crystal clear vision of what could be built. And by the way, this was against the backdrop of very more simple 2D sprite based games that were all trying to fundraise in the wake of Axie. But instead, this was a team that knew that the more lucrative, higher ARPU customers and players actually tended to be Western players that played shooters, and to go after that market and already have partial completion, both of small vertical slices of the game that we were able to see rendered, not pre-rendered, but game engine rendered videos for with high quality assets and animations. That was something that immediately stood out from the pack. And this was a period where we would be getting a lot of, let's say, average or lower quality pitches a day, but to see something that stood out along 5 or 6 different axes, not just a little bit, but 2 or 3 standard deviations in quality was something that helped us get there. And it, obviously, we're very pleased to have supported Gunzilla through all this way, and of course, to be co-investors with Lydia and her team.
On my end, I'll obviously echo some of what Lydia said, but what I'll add is, and actually I'll preface it by something that is actually an important statement to make, and that is a lot of people throw around the term AAA, and very few folks actually really know what it stands for or what it actually means to really make a AAA game. Everybody these days just slaps that label on if it's built in Unreal Engine 5. AAA, the first A stands really for are all the assets custom made. And in Off the Grid, every single asset, every single texture, everything is handmade. There's nothing in there that is off the shelf from a Unreal Engine 5 store where you can buy any kind of building you want, characters, cars, whatnot, weapons. So that's one. The second A stands for where is it deployed? If you're not on console and on major platforms, sorry, but you're not a AAA game. And last but not least, are you using the engine in its kind of format, or are you customizing the engine? So in Off the Grid, there's a lot of customizations that go into how the flames burn, how the concrete splinters and the little dust clouds come up when a bullet hits it, all of these things. So there's a really high bar for true AAA. And that's part of the mode that obviously I was referring to with those 5 years. So that's one. But two, when I met the team in 2021, what totally blew me away, and segue, as a side note, I've been investing into Web2 projects. I've been building my own project. So I've seen a lot of teams. I was mentoring entrepreneurs for years. I have never seen a team that was as dedicated to this as the Gunzilla team. Specifically, right, they started building 2 years prior to ever fundraising. They funded this with $15 million of their own capital. They assembled a team of 100 super, super talented people, including, as Lydia said, right, onboarding Neil Blomkamp as a co-founder, of course, the crazy, amazing film director behind District 9, Chappie, Elysium with Matt Damon, and Last Year Gran Turismo for Orlando Bloom. And they onboarded Richard Morgan. They have Timur Davidenko, who's the CTO that built CryEngine, which was the gold standard for testing GPUs back then, and was used in Far Cry and Crisis, later on sold to Amazon, still is being used and called Lumberyard, and other crazy talent like that. And yes, they'd also built Warface that they grew to 150 million gamers. And I had never seen a team like this. In addition to, of course, Vlad's just incredible vision and a business experience, they'd also built Plink prior to this, which is the largest social gamer network in the world with 18 million subscribers, making over 100,000 matches per day, like Tinder, like swipe left, swipe right to find folks to game with. So they had this crazy, incredible experience and this incredibly passionate vision that they themselves invested an incredible amount of money into. So yeah, I was blown away with the team. And for the first time, after having been independent, quote unquote, and building my own companies for decades, I actually joined another team because of how impressed I was with everything that they were doing. But you're right. I mean, it wasn't obvious, right, that it would be this incredible runaway success that it ended up becoming obvious right after October 8th. But all of the necessary ingredients were there. And if there was any team that was able to accomplish something like this, it was this team. And they did. So
I guess also talking not only about the positives of Web3 and gaming, like I think it'd be great to just maybe think through where you see the largest remaining risks to adoption. I think part of it might be still getting over, especially for mainstream Web2 audiences, just maybe a little reluctance to engage on chain and put the ownership economy first as the value prop that they respond to. But maybe to generalize a little bit for Theo or Lydia, how do you think about the remaining challenges for Web3 gaming adoption, either broadly or more specifically for off the grid?
I'll jump into a broad statement first. In order for Web3 gaming, and I'll echo Lydia's sentiment as well, that I'm not a big fan of labels. I want in the future there to be just one thing, and that's gaming. And it uses the best possible technologies for whatever the current problem is that the game is trying to solve. And that happens to be in a lot of areas blockchain. But having said that, so in order for Web3 gaming to receive really broad adoption, or in order for Web3 enabled games to receive broad adoption, they have to do a lot of things differently. They have to, number one, focus on the gamer first and foremost. They have to focus on sustainability long term. They can't be pixie fairy dust treasuries, I call them, right? They just pump out inflationary tokens, diluting the supply, where everyone knows exactly where it's going to end up long term, right? This prolific gamified staking game of musical chairs. Like, they have to take this seriously and build long term for the gamer. It cannot also be something that's gated by NFTs. That's nonsensical. To a regular gamer, that makes no sense. Why would I buy something to be given access to a game? It makes no sense at all, right? So all of that needs to change in order for Web3 gaming to be taken seriously by mainstream. And Gunzilla, of course, is at the forefront of that. And I think as we onboard 12 plus million wallets, as we onboard the next 12 million wallets, as we onboard the next 50 million wallets, as we onboard 100 million wallets, right, which is obviously our goal with off the grid and the ecosystem as a whole, people will realize like that's what it takes to get mainstream adoption. And I think some of that is already visible now, right? There's already a lot of rumblings in Web3 gaming that, wow, that's really what you need to do. And there's a blueprint and this is what we need to follow. But we'll have more and more of that. The more successful Gunzilla and the Gunzi ecosystem becomes, the more companies and Web3 projects, specifically in gaming, will realize that there is a path for mainstream adoption, but it does require some very significant systemic changes that need to happen in Web3 gaming in order for them to be able to accomplish that.
Yeah, I would add on with regards to mainstream adoption, some of the signals that we're seeing that blockchain adoption is happening in the mainstream, it's been iterative. And I think everyone wants to see this giant revolution. Everyone like, yes, we're all going to build on blockchain all of a sudden. And then we're going to see billions of dollars of assets being exchanged. And it's just not going to happen like that. Technology historically, and Theo, I'm sure you've seen this as well, innovative technology was always first adopted by enterprises, by corporates. Blockchain or crypto is one of the first technologies that have been adopted by the individual first. And so we're having to do this weird backing into convincing corporations and technologies that despite all of these individual consumer specific use cases that have proliferated largely around speculation, trading of magic pixie fairy dust, that there is real value in this technology. And we need these tentpole examples to show the way. And Gunzilla will be it for gaming. Off the grid will be it for gaming. I'm totally confident in this. We even saw New York Red Bulls and Sports Illustrated sign a deal. Yes, for naming rights, but the arena will actually be fully adopting blockchain-enabled ticketing in 2026. So this is something that, again, we're not seeing the entire MLS or Major League Soccer adopt it. We're not seeing the entire football league or basketball league adopt this. It's one team, one arena. Show that it works, and then others will follow. Like exactly like Theo said, there will be a blueprint. So the path to mainstream adoption is just going to be a lot of these small little steps that accumulate into what feels like a revolution at the time. But I think when we're all on the other side of it, we'll look back and like we'll remember these conversations and go like, man, that was so long ago. But I think people aren't really paying attention to these little signals. And also on a macro front, right? Like in the US, we're poised for this environment where even the sound bites on Bitcoin, right? We're not here to talk about Bitcoin, but that's like the first area that people really gravitate towards when they're thinking about consumer adoption, mainstream adoption. And you've even got Ken Griffin saying, what did he say? It was a mistake not to buy crypto earlier. And he also has the view that the American people want to have agency over their money. So like this top down shift in sentiment and also with an expected and hopefully a changing regulatory environment with these bottom-up proof points, that consumer adoption of blockchain is not that far away. And it makes me a lot more hopeful about it.
Maybe for our
Absolutely.
last question, we can just shift a little bit to the future. We're getting into that mode right now. Really quickly, what are your long-term expectations for Web3 gaming? What percentage of commercially successful games 5 to 10 years from now are going to have some blockchain component? And maybe could you also riff a little bit on like Web2 publishers and studios? You think they're going to start to focus on this now, 3, 4, 5 years from now? What proof points have to happen before the big guys start showing up?
Well, so one, I believe that gamers will be the ones that will start demanding asset ownership. And gamers will start not playing the games where they cannot have asset ownership if they have equally as entertaining and as immersive games that do give them asset ownership. I do believe we'll see it over the next 5 years. And what would it take? Yeah? Take 100 million wallets or 100 million people playing Gunzilla's games on the Gunzi ecosystem, like off the grid, in order for the really big guys to take notice, and in order for gamers to take notice. Holy moly, I can actually take this, share it with a friend. I can take this. I have 3 sniper rifles, Kestrel sniper rifles. I can sell 2 of them, keep the one that I want, and then buy whatever, some scopes and muzzles and other attachments for that one sniper rifle. And I don't need to do anything else. I don't need to go to some shop and buy things over and over again that I don't own. Wow. Why doesn't everybody do that? So it takes a little while to change minds and to make this prevalent amongst gamers. But that is what will happen, I believe, over the next 5 years. As far as integrations, implementations, and how many, I believe over the next 5 years, every single larger game out there will have some Web3 enabled component. Some, right? Some will go all the way, token, marketplace, wallet, everything. Some will simply set up a marketplace and convert all of their items into NFTs and allow users to trade them, or even have all of the items in a database and allow users to trade them. But the ability to actually own your item and trade it, at least within the game, I believe will be absolutely prevalent in most games out there in the next 5 years.
A corroborating piece of evidence I noticed too, as I was definitely poking around the chats of some of the large streamers that were streaming to their audiences off the grid around launch, a lot of engagement, a lot of questions, but also answers from the audience to themselves about this concept of ownership and why it's ultimately beneficial. And that was something that I noticed being quite different than 2 or 3 years ago, right? People asking or responding to Shroud or Tim the Tapman's own comments about why ownership is interesting. I don't think that was part of the marketing contractual agreement. I think those were actually just like out of the blue statements.
All organic.
But there's some alpha leak there that was actually pretty organic. So you can see the wheels turning not only of streamers but their audiences to this concept that Lydia, you raised about this quiet adoption and coming both from the top down and bottom up. As we move towards wrapping up this episode, Theo and Lydia, where can people find out and follow you and learn more about both of what you're working on personally and obviously on behalf of your organizations?
Yeah, so to learn more about Avalanche, the Avalanche website is avax.network, avax.network. Avalabs is avalabs.org, and you can also follow the accounts on X. Avalanche is at avax, and I myself am at encyclopedia, and hope everyone has a happy new year.
On our end, pretty easy. Follow us on X at Play Off the Grid. And then, of course, download the game Off the Grid on PlayStation, on Xbox Series X and S, as well as on the Epic Game Store. We also are fully integrated into the NVIDIA GeForce Now program, where you can play on your mobile devices, on your TV, probably even a smart fridge would work, and on lower-end PCs at the highest quality level, available pretty much everywhere at this point in time. And also, yeah, Happy New Year to everyone, and thank you so much for having us here.
Thank you so much for joining us, Theo and Lydia. It was great. Learned a lot, and I know our listeners did too. We appreciate having you on the show. That was Gunzilla's Director of Web3, Theo Agranat, and Avalab's SVP of Corporate Development, Lydia Chiu. For those of you who tuned in, thank you so much for listening. Let's keep the conversation going. Leave us a review. Let us know what you thought, what we could have done better. If you'd like to follow me on X, Twitter, my handle is Pakman, Pakman, and Evans is Evan the Feng, spelled EvanThefeng. Make sure you download us wherever you get your podcasts, and we will be back soon with another episode on the blockchain space. Thank you so much for listening.